Now, the annual rate of inflation in the March quarter has fallen to 3.6%. That's slightly higher than anticipated. Rents, education, fees and hospital services all jumped during the quarter, which does put pressure on the Reserve Bank to keep interest rates higher for longer. Let's bring in now live the independent leading economist, Chris Richardson. Chris, today's set of inflation numbers, they weren't pretty, were they?
They weren't pretty. They were higher than expected by economists. They were higher than expected by the Reserve Bank. And that's a complication. That's a complication pretty much whoever you are in Australia. Our cost of living problems have their source in inflation. That says the problem isn't going away as fast as we'd like. And a government which, other things equal, would probably like to be announcing a few things to make people happier in the budget, has to keep a pretty close eye that its decisions don't add to the inflationary risks here in Australia.
Well, that's a good point. We spoke with the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, last hour, and he spoke about his goal to reduce cost of living pressures in the upcoming budget. How can he do that without adding to the inflation problem?
And that's a real problem. The Treasurer is just back from meetings in Washington with the International Monetary Fund. The IMF regularly says governments should help their central banks fight inflation, and to do that, they need some combination of winding back spending or increasing taxes. Here in Australia, of course, we're cutting taxes and raising spending, or in other words, the government is making it a bit harder for the Reserve Bank to get on top of inflation. To be clear, lots of these things, like the tax cut, long promised, even if it's been rejigged. But it does mean that the government has to be careful not to do too much more. Otherwise, certainly markets would be pointing out, well, you may not get a rate cut ahead of the election.
And how strong would you suggest the economic argument is that rates should actually be lifted to get on top of this problem, let alone talking about starting to cut later this year?
There are good economists who are saying that. It's not something I'm saying. It is perfectly true that other nations have raised their interest rates higher and that they haven't, by and large, begun to cut them yet. Equally, Australia's unusual when the Reserve Bank moves rates. Those people with mortgages, most of them in Australia, feel the pain of that pretty fast. So even though our rates haven't moved as much as it's seen in some other nations, the pain of that has certainly been felt here in Australia. So I'm hopeful, very hopeful, that we don't need to raise rates anymore, but I would not be hopeful that we're cutting interest rates in Australia anytime soon.